Welcome to Quantum Leap in Higher Education, the podcast where we explore how colleges and universities are reimagining the future of learning. Here's the thing, higher education is at a crossroads. The landscape is shifting faster than ever before. Artificial intelligence is transforming how we teach, how students learn, and how institutions operate. The approaches that worked for decades, they're being challenged, questioned, and reinvented in real time. So what does innovation really look like in higher education today? How are forward-thinking leaders embracing AI and emerging technologies? And how do we ensure these challenges and changes actually serve students and strengthen learning over time? We'll talk with the educators, administrators, and innovators who are meeting this moment head-on, turning challenges into opportunities and shaping what's next for higher education. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the future. This is Quantum Leap, brought to you by N2N and LightLeapAI. All right, we are in for a treat this afternoon. I want to welcome to the stage Emad Rahim. He was born in a concentration camp during the Khmer Rouge Genocide in Cambodia. He arrived in Brooklyn as a stateless refugee in the 1980s, carrying trauma and an unshakable will to rise. Once a dyslexic student who barely graduated high school, he went on to earn 3 doctorates, become a Fulbright Scholar, TEDx speaker, and served as a college dean and endowed chair. Today, he's an award-winning educator, acclaimed author, and globally recognized motivational speaker. I believe he also has copies of his book for you here today as well as a gift. He's been profiled in Forbes, Huffington Post, StoryCorps, and PBS's Against the Odds. Please, a warm welcome for Emad Rahim. So nice to see you.
Hey, happy to be here. You know, I made it with the snowstorm.
You had quite a journey, but how it just sort of fits with your life.
It's chaos.
In some way. Help me understand. We've been having conversations about technology and how it's providing opportunities and a runway for us to realize a future that maybe we thought was far into the future much sooner. Yet we've had speakers also talk about the desire or the need to be connected as humans. And something about chatting with you the other day and doing some research on you was the humanity that rings true with you and everything that you do, regardless of the doctorates and the speaking and the books and all of that. Help me understand that and what it means to you and your own journey to maintain that sense of self, regardless of the accomplishments or the achievements and or the despair that you experienced as a young child.
You know, I would not be who I am today if it wasn't for, adults that gave me the opportunity, that saw something in me, right? That invited me to their community and created a community around me, right? I'm a dyslexic kid, refugee, raised by a single parent, was a troublemaker. And it took a vice principal at a high school to see something in me and refuse to give up on me. And then when I graduated high school, I didn't know what college is supposed to be, right? I was first generation college student. So there's like no orientation that says, hey, this is what college life is supposed to be like.
No blueprint.
No blueprint, right? I treated college like 13th grade. So it's like I'm dropping out of class, right? Hanging out in the hallways, focused more on girls than my grades and so forth. And it was a college professor that saw something in me and refused to give up on me, right? So all of these roadblocks that I've been confronted with, there was always a person that stood in front of that roadblock and said, come this way, right? So if it wasn't for those human elements that saw something in me, that mentored me, that coached me, I would not be the person I am today.
And what's fascinating about your background, obviously you worked in higher education. So you've been behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so many young people, and frankly, many of their parents are really worried or concerned maybe because they don't know exactly what the future holds, right? We talked earlier before you got here about guided pathways, like sort of structuring these different elements and how do we become more efficient in understanding the personalized needs of these students. Yet your story it hinges on that human touch, right? That acknowledgement that someone saw something in you and said, this is not 13th grade.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you're not doing it right.
That's right. We're literally graduating, figuratively and literally, into something different. Well, how do you approach this when you think about talking with audiences of young people so that while they may be excited at the technology that is in front of them, there's a responsibility, a sense of connection and community that keeps them grounded.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been at the forefront of innovation in higher education because I worked at for-profit institutions and I worked at nonprofit traditional research schools. So I've seen both sides in regards to how they use technology, how they utilize resources. And I remember when competency-based learning was like the big thing. And people worry that, oh, you're just going to give students exams. They're not going to learn anything. They're just memorizing things, right? And what we realize is that, as humans, we have flaws, right? And the competency-based learning allowed us to identify those weaknesses and hone on them, and then utilize the tools and techniques to grow those weaknesses into strengths, but then also focus on the strengths to identify the type of education that best fits your profile. And I think AI is going to do the same thing, that we don't have to waste time on this monotonous, on this back and forth. Let's focus on your strengths.
Does it level the playing field to some degree when we're thinking about sort of an equitable opportunity? And in essence, we're not risking that you wouldn't have had that one adult that spotted you and said, no, let's really refocus, that somehow the AI is going to help to understand and find the young Emad Rahim,
Yeah.
right? Is that?
I think it depends on how you use it, right? So if you see it as a tool to better your education, then that's great. It's another tool in your toolbox. If you're using it as a way to take advantage of education and kind of like bypass certain things, then that's not a good way of using it, right? It has to evolve with you. Like I did not know what dyslexia was, right? So I was a special ed student that went from elementary school to middle school to high school. Always,
You knew.
that's what I knew. But it wasn't until college that I found out that I was dyslexic, and it took that professor to kind of notice my writing, right? Took time to interview me, took time to learn about my writing style, my study style. That took months. AI can do that instantly, right? So when we talk about, even the playing field, to me, even the playing field for my generation was like spell check. Because, like I said, my reading and writing, my comprehension took longer than everybody. I was a slower reader. I was a slower writer. Sometimes I would write notes and go back and couldn't even understand what I wrote, right? But it took spell check. It took all these other competency-based learning, all these other technologies and curriculum that focus more on kinesthetic learning, right? That help elevate me and help elevate a lot of students like me. So I think AI will do the same exact thing.
Let's talk about a sense of responsibility. These are my words, not yours. I think with your background and your passion for connecting and understanding one's, I think, truth and honoring their history, but also applying it to their future, you have an opportunity, and it sounds like you're applying that to help the next generation in a world where I worry about their mental health when they feel like maybe the choices are going to change and the adults won't be able to provide maybe the answers that our generations maybe had the opportunity to experience because it was pretty systematic, right? We just knew what we needed to do. How do you understand that sense of responsibility? Doesn't mean you're the only voice, but you're a voice to connect with the masses in a way that I think could settle their nerves or help them understand the opportunity before them.
Yeah.
Even though they may not be able to see around the corner.
COVID has created a lot of anxiety for young people, right? A lot of them, spent 3 years, if not 4 years of their life on a computer and lost that human interaction. So a lot of them struggle with social cues. They struggle with like social skills, like soft skills. And when they have to create new relationships or when they have to engage in interviews or presentations, they have real anxiety, like sweating, nervous tics, panic attacks. When I look at AI, I see it as a tool that they can utilize to kind of calm themselves down, right? Instead of having to memorize things right away, they can kind of figure out like what makes sense and what doesn't make sense in the palm of their hand. They don't have to seek for advice right away. They don't have to look for experts, right? I mean, you need a level of fact checks, obviously, because AI doesn't know everything, right? But I find that when students have the answers in front of them, it gives them time to like calm themselves down, right? So if they're presenting, they're like, where's my book? Oh, where's my notes, right? Oh, how do I get the answer to this question? When they have a tool in front of them and they're able to review this information or analyze this information on their own time, right? It calms them down. And they can figure out, what can I dissect from this information that makes sense in regards to sound bites when I present something or when I meet somebody for the first time. I think as adults, right, as mentors, as parents, we have to walk them through this process and say, that's not the answer for everything, right? That's a support. That's an assistant tool. That's a resource. But you need these other things. So that's where our guidance and our voice comes into play.
So there was an article recently in the last, I think, month that one of the top now jobs being searched for is storytelling. The reason I bring that up, because I think it's fascinating about your story. And I'm wondering at what age and sort of what was going on in your life when you realized your story was somewhat of a superpower as opposed to maybe a crutch when you didn't maybe feel that you belonged when you coming from Cambodia. Like, help me understand your relationship to your own story, because that to me is what can connect so much in a world where we want to maintain that connection. But part of that is being able to narrate our own story and find co-authors for the next chapter.
You know, when you introduced me, you mentioned I was a motivational speaker. I would say I'm a storyteller than anything else. Because I know my story more than anybody else, obviously. So I feel comfortable in my own skin. It was by accident, to be honest. I was approached to be part of a theater production, and I have no acting skills. I have no background in theater, and I was approached to be part of this theater production. And the production was to talk about immigration, refugee stories, and how people kind of collide. They end up being at the same place at the right time. And I had to learn other people's stories. And being on that stage was this powerful experience. It was like therapy. And I didn't realize this is something that's healing, right? So as I was telling my story on stage and I saw all of these people in front of me, I noticed people were leaning in. And I saw emotions. I saw people crying. I saw people laughing. It's like we're having this wonderful conversation. And I've never experienced anything like that. And when I got off stage, and it's funny because, like I said, I'm not an actor. I'm not supposed to like go off stage and start meeting people in the audience because it's like traditional theater. You're not supposed to do that. And I would get off stage and start shaking hands with people. And when I did that, I realized people want to share their story now. Like, they heard your story. Now I want to share my story with you.
It's so powerful.
It is powerful. And I find it like almost addictive. Like, when you allow people to be vulnerable, they take advantage of it right away. They find connections and meaning in your story. Like, we don't have all the same story, obviously, right? We don't have the same parents and so forth. But there's things in the stories like dates, places, right? A special event that allows people to kind of connect with your story. Say, hey, I grew up in Brooklyn. I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember what it was like in 1982 with when hip hop first came about, right? So as you're sharing your story, you start noticing people connecting to bits and pieces of it, and they're drawn to the story because they also want to be part of that community. Then they want to share their story.
Yeah, it does create this. It's a connectivity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That there's something about hearing. It's a permission structure, if you will. I mean, if we think about all these rules in technology, it really is some interpersonal rule that says, you've shared your story. It's going to be okay for me to share my story.
Exactly.
I appreciate that anecdote about jumping sort of off stage.
Yeah.
I can almost picture you doing that. Help us understand when you're presenting and you're speaking as a storyteller, what are the questions that you're getting that are not when you're on stage from young people about your story? Can we glean anything about some of the conversations, in essence, off the record, when they're seeking counsel, or they just they kind of want to test what they're thinking with someone who has been vulnerable enough to share their own story?
A lot of it has to do with, how do I be vulnerable? Like, they don't say it, but it's more like, how do I tell my father about this thing?
Is there a tell when you notice that? Is there something in the way in which they're presenting that in your mind you say, okay, this is really about vulnerability.
That's exactly it. It's how they hold themselves, right? It's what they're sharing. They're not saying, I need you to do something for me, right? I mean, there are people that instead of like, you ever get in that environment when you're trying to network and there's always that one person that's really trying to take advantage of the room. They take the air, right? When I'm on stage and off stage and I share this story and I find when someone comes to me, if they have their hand out like this, so they're leaning forward and they're saying, hey, what you said was very powerful. And my grandfather went through this, or you said this about what happened to your father. And I remember my mother telling me this story. So they're trying to connect with you by sharing a little bit about themselves. And they go into saying something like, hey, I'm struggling with this thing. How did you overcome that? Right? Or I've noticed this thing in me. I think I'm dyslexic. So how can I test that? Right? Or I noticed that you left education and you kind of created your own path. I want to create my own path. So what are the tools do I need? What type of education do I need and things like that. So a lot of them is that, they're asking for advice. They're asking for support. They're asking for help.
Do you think they're also asking how you came to find the courage, but maybe more importantly, to discover the belief in yourself to create your own path?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of these kids that I've met, people that I've interacted with on stage, especially at high schools and colleges, they don't have a plan B, right? Plan A was it, right? And now they're in front of this roadblock and they're like, hey, I can't seem to get past this. And I don't have a plan B, right? So how did you do it? Right? And everybody's telling me this is the only route that I could pursue, because when we look at traditional education, right, the word traditional is there. There's a clear path. And if you can't get through that path, if you can't follow that path, you end up dropping out. You're not worthy of it. Right? And I find that technology balances this, but we want to make technology accessible to everybody. That's the difference.
So how do you split the difference then, right? Because we see all these statistics that like 60% of people are using ChatGPT and these models to, in essence, have these emotional conversations. So we want to embrace the technology, but we don't want to lose a sense of ourselves that would force us to have a conversation with you, to understand your path, not because I want to replicate it, but because I want to be inspired by your willingness to be vulnerable, to put yourself out there, and to chart a path that no one else has charted because it's your own.
Yeah.
How do you split that difference?
So there's a student that I met at Swift University, and he's a film major. He does like amazing documentary. He's using AI to kind of bypass the research side of it. So instead of taking months and months of like grabbing research everywhere, he is creating a community of people using ChatGPT, Gemini, and pulling this information together to tell a story that's more captivating in his mind. And instead of pursuing that traditional route, he's an SU student, but he's not taking the traditional theater route. He's looking at media a different way, right? And he's creating a community of other people that are like-minded and thinking the same way, right? So what I'm saying is that just like, and for those that have kids, you probably noticed your kids have been on the computer a lot more and off it's gaming, right? I have nieces and nephews that are dating, but they've never met the other person because they've been gaming. Everything's virtual. Like their dating is, I'm seeing that person on the other side of Zoom and we're playing video games, right? I think hopefully AI will help take that to a different level, right? Because now they are creating spaces where they're saying, hey, I learned this from this AI tool. What did you learn from your AI tool? And let's try to collaborate, right? Let's create a product together. I also work with a lot of startup companies, and more startup companies are becoming leaner in a sense, like we don't need all of these people, but then the people that they do have, they all have very strong personalities that connect with each other, right? So instead of having 20 people do all these things, now they have 6, but these are 6 meaningful connections, right? So they kind of filter what they need and what they don't need because of it.
How has technology impacted, this is you and I nerding out as fellow storytellers, an appreciation for story.
Yeah.
How has AI and technology inspired your storytelling to take it potentially to even a different or deeper or farther destination that I guess could potentially have even a broader impact on audiences near and far?
I think using it as a feedback tool, help improve who I am as a storyteller, look at gaps, look at opportunities. Ask AI to do research on the place you're presenting at ahead of time and who you're presenting to figure out like what type of things I should include. What type of places should I mention? What type of food should we include, right? So it's going to do a lot of that heavy lifting. At the same time, imagine using AI as a backdrop. And as you're presenting, AI is actually providing feedback live, right? Or interacting with your story. Because it's so intuitive, like Gemini is very intuitive because of Google, right? I've seen, what's his name? Scott Galloway, who's a very well-known technology speaker,
Yes.
finance speaker. And he talks about AI in an instant, like knows his date, know his like favorite conference and things like that. And he talks about being on stage. And as he's talking, the backdrop is changing because AI realized, oh, you're going to talk about going to New York now. I'm going to change it to a New York screen. You don't have to have somebody like waiting 1, 2, 3, and then click, right? AI is identifying certain buzzwords. The music changes, the mood changes because it's so intuitive.
It's almost like bringing a dream state into reality.
Exactly.
So
Right.
does that inspire you? Does that make you even that much more excited about your story? Because I find that a lot of storytellers, people are starting to tell their story. They're finding, wait a minute, now I have an opportunity to tell more of the story.
Yeah, I mean, you have a DJ, right? You have a sound person. You have like everything, like based on all the technology that I'm seeing in regards to how intuitive it is, it can create almost like a production around you. And the production is scaled to your needs.
I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your relationship to success. I think one of the things I'm taking away from Quantum Leap and that I'll be thinking about tomorrow on my flight home is just how to understand not only my place within technology, but the conversation, the stories that sort of follow suit, but to know where we fit sort of long term. And so when you're playing out sort of the role that you're playing in the character of your story,
Yeah.
do you look at it as different paths that are right in front of you? Like, how are you approaching tomorrow in a way that's different than it might have been a few years ago? Even when you were riding in 2017, you're driving down Detroit and thinking, what am I seeing? What's going on with this city, right? We're 2026 now.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about the future in a much more present day perspective?
I think there's a lot of optimism, but also, it's nervousness, right? There's just a lot of things that we feel like is out of our control, right? It seems like AI is going forward regardless, right? But I think we still need to be in the basic driver's seat. We need to be able to steer it in the right direction. As a kid, I was into comic books, right? I was into like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And some of those books that I read, that I used to read, had those choose your own adventure.
Love that you
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're in that stage where we can choose our own adventure, where a kid that grew up in a certain household, grew up in a certain community, instead of society telling him this is the only path you have, right? I think with the resources that are available, they can choose their own adventure. They have the ability to do that. And I say this is because when we look at technology, you mentioned accessibility, right? There was a point where if you couldn't afford a laptop, there was a disadvantage automatically. If you couldn't afford a smartphone, there was a disadvantage automatically. These things require a lot of money, require knowing the right people, and you needed training because once you have it, right, you need to know how to use it.
That's right.
Right? I mean, ChatGPT, Gemini is free, Copilot's free. All these things are very accessible. And our kids, they're growing up with phones. They're growing up with tablets. They know this technology, like the back of the hand. Versus like people like you and me, we have to analyze it and understand it. And sometimes we have to ask our kids how to use this stuff. So they're going to be way ahead of us.
I'll get you out of here on this. And then, like I said, I believe there are books here in the Roxy that Emad has said that he would sign for everybody. One thing that's fascinating in your story is being a refugee. And I have been very fortunate to document the refugee story across the African continent. And one of the things I've taken away from refugees, we have more now than we've ever had in our history, is this sense of never feeling home, right? Like we're redefining what home is, or what we thought it was, and now it's no longer. I can't help but see the parallel to this world now with AI and young people wondering where the stability comes from, where that's comfortable, I've recognized that comes from. And the advice you might give if the audience today was filled with students trying to understand where to point, where's their true north, if it feels like things are moving at such a rapid pace.
I think this goes back to being able to control what's in front of you, right? You need to be in the driver's seat to control it. You have to learn, you have to seek knowledge, you have to seek support to really use the tool to craft your own story, right? Your own path. As refugees, at least my family and other families that are similar to me, when we came to Brooklyn in the 80s, right? And we grew up in Sunset Park, and Sunset Park was like Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Haitians. And I remember no one got along. Right? No one got along. But every summer, everybody came together for these block parties. And it was because they wanted to celebrate their culture, right? They want to celebrate their music, their barbecue, their history. It became like a beautiful battle scene. Instead of physical, it's like, hey, look at my culture versus your culture. And everybody had pride in that. And I there's an opportunity to utilize AI to celebrate people's culture, to celebrate people's stories, to bring attention to things that are happening in our community from a different perspective, using data to support facts, using images to stir emotions, right? But we have to make sure we're using it the right way, right? And I think that's the important thing, is that there's a sense of fear that exists, and I think it's natural, right? It's important that we do have a sense of fear, but there's also needs to be a sense of opportunity, right? And being an optimist in regards to all the potential that exists.
Well, I can't tell you how thankful I am that you made your flight, the efforts to get here through storms. I know I can speak on behalf of the audience here at the Roxy and Quantum Leap, just how fortunate to have an authentic story of humanity in the times of technology and the beauty that it can reveal. But going back to, it's about community and the stories that we tell. A nice round of applause for Emad Rahim.
Thank you, Steve.
Welcome to Quantum Leap in Higher Education, the podcast where we explore how colleges and universities are reimagining the future of learning. Here's the thing. Higher education is at a crossroads. The landscape is shifting faster than ever before. Artificial intelligence is transforming how we teach, how students learn, and how institutions operate. The approaches that worked for decades, they're being challenged, questioned, and reinvented in real time. So what does innovation really look like in higher education today? How are forward-thinking leaders embracing AI and emerging technologies? And how do we ensure these challenges and changes actually serve students and strengthen learning over time? We'll talk with the educators, administrators, and innovators who are meeting this moment head on, turning challenges into opportunities and shaping what's next for higher education. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the future. This is Quantum Leap, brought to you by N2N and LightLeapAI.